everybody. Thank you for coming tonight in the first of a series of Asheville conversations, mostly about African American life in Asheville at various times. But one of the evenings will be a presentation about the Afghan resettlement project that's currently going on in the Asheville area, and that will be next week. But tonight, it's Asheville Conversations, and Deacon Glenda McDowell will be our interviewee, and I've been looking forward to this ever since the idea came into our minds. And the way this will work is that we'll talk for 45 minutes, maybe 50 minutes or something, though we could go on for a long time. And then to allow you all who are here, and I know there are people who are watching like angels from a different place, but those of you who are here will have the opportunity to ask any questions in the time that remains of our evening's presentation. So be listening to Deacon Glenda and then formulate any things you would like to ask her about that we didn't get a chance to cover, which will be many things. But I thought I'd like to begin the way we always do when we're talking to somebody. So, you moved to Asheville when you were 8, but you lived in Burke County before then.
Well, I was born in Burke County.
Born in Burke, and Burke County is not quite like Asheville. And so, Deacon Glenda, how was it growing up there? And then what was the transition like for you when you moved from there to the big city of Asheville and went up the hill?
Well, remember, I was 8. So, living in Burke County, I'll say that I was born in Morganton. However, we lived in that big subdivision outside of Morganton called Glen Alpine. And what I found out much later, it was a community of one large family. I often say people in Asheville can't date because they're all related. I shouldn't say that anymore because everybody on Jamestown Road in that section, we were all cousins. So the difference was living in Burke County, it was very rural. We were extremely poor, but very land rich. So living in Burke County, the houses were spread, and we had yards. I moved to Asheville and I lived on Valley Street, which is now South Charlotte Street. And where you see that government building, the city building, the Taj Mahal for garage, trash trucks, there were homes, there were businesses. So here I am, 8, move into the city. Was a big transition for a small child, leaving what was familiar and having had someone somewhere to play. Because how the houses were on Valley Street, it was the street house. That was it. You just stepped off the street into the house. The biggest thing that I remember also is living in Burke County. I was there when I-40 came through. I'm very much aware that what happens in splitting communities. When I-40 came through, they jacked up our house, put it on a truck, and set it over here, where one day you could walk to your neighbor's house. Now you had to go up the road, across the bridge, and over here. And where it had been a community, now you had 3 little houses on this side that weren't connected to anything. So in the name of progress, I guess moving to Asheville was part of that process also.
Well, what memories do you have of being a young girl in Asheville and, life in Valley Street, and what was the feel of it?
Okay. To be quite honest, and if you know me, I'm a very honest person. I lived in a liquor house. My aunt made her living by selling what she called quarter shots. The interesting thing, though, to me, living in that house, which was owned by a judge, and she never got raided, that was always interesting to me. Also, from our living room, you could literally look into the door of St. Matthias. So that was our church. So I went from a small AME Zion church to a big Catholic, it looked like, church. The one thing I can tell you about church that prepared me for life is that it was high church. And in high church, they spoke Latin. Half of the service was done in Latin. So in high school, I got a B in Latin. So it was amazing, but as a child, the other things that I remember is that, this was the time of water fountains, black and white. This was a time where we were really, really segregated. The thought in our house, if you did not go to church on Sunday, you didn't do anything else. And you always looked forward to going to the Plaza Theater. That was the enjoyment. We did not get to go to the Imperial Theater down on Patton Avenue. You went to the back of the Plaza Theater. The back of the Plaza Theater also was the main district for the African American business community. So it was like, yeah, you had your own theater. Well, the other thing I didn't quite understand during segregation as to where you placed people. My Caucasian friends were on the bottom, and we were in the balcony. Do you really think that was a good idea? Just ask.
You mentioned St. Matthias, and as a kid you went there, and there was a lot of Latin and all. But what are your childhood memories of going to church and what church meant to you and how it started to form you?
Well, church was a community, and you always have to look at St. Matthias, and if you've not been there, please go. St. Matthias can easily sit 500 people, easily. And the church was the center of the community. It was life. There was always something going on in church, being presented in church. Also, the high school that was across the way, Stevens Lee, which was called the Castle on the Hill, they would have their baccalaureate services there. So as a young girl, to see them march in their robes and they flip this thing, that's what you live for. That's going to be me someday. Or I will never forget being a child. Francine Delaney, I think you know that name. Mrs. Delaney and her family attended St. Matthias. And one day she came in. First of all, she was absolutely beautiful. Her husband was handsome. Her children looked like they were perfect. She floated, literally, it looked like she floated in church one Sunday. And she had a full sable coat on. As a small child, I looked at that coat and said, I'm going to get that one day. I was determined to get a job because I wanted a coat like that. Well, I don't know if I ever got to the point where I could afford a coat like that, but when I thought I could, PETA was throwing paint on people's coat because it was fur. As that old saying goes, try God, don't try me, because I fight back. I didn't need a savior. But being in church was part of life. That's where your voice came from. You spoke in church. You were loved in church. No matter what was going on here in the world, because the world wasn't a good place, very much like it is now. We were segregated. So no matter whatever you went through there, on Sunday, that was your time that people spoke to you, they hugged you. You know, if you've ever been to St. Matthias Peace, it takes a long time to do peace at St. Matthias. Everybody gets touched. Everybody gets hugged. In fact, it goes on so long sometimes if you're a visitor, you leave because you think it's the end of church. So that had a lot to do with it. That was where I met your deacon from All Souls, Joan Marshall. Joan Marshall became my godmother in church. So church kind of defined me when I got old enough to go to convention, when I got old enough to know what was actually happening in church. I had these church mothers that saw to it, and they were all professional people. St. Matthias at that time had African Americans that were affluent. Here were your police officers. Here were your nurses. Here were your school teachers. So being around that type or those individuals definitely would mark you for life. That you wanted to aspire. You wanted to be like them. You wanted to excel and have those hugs when people said, I'm so proud of you. So it gave me life. It was growth. It was where I knew I was somebody, even if it was for a moment and even if it was only on Sunday.
You were saying that you grew up in Valley Street, or when you moved to Asheville, but when South Charlotte was rammed through, you moved.
First of all, I come from a family that is like 5 generations homeowners. Even though we were in the country that was rural, we owned our home. That was our land. So when we lived on Valley Street with my aunt, she was renting. My mother was determined, first of all, we were not going to live in public housing, because when they decided to redevelop that community, when I said Valley Street had homes, you ask yourself, what happened to those people? Well, let me say, they were moved. And if you look now, you ask yourself, why are there 6 and 7 generations in public housing? Where else did they get, where did they go? Where did they put these people? So my mother bought a house, one that should not have been sold to anyone. It was a stucco house, and in fact, it was so awful. Later, when they redeveloped, she got a new house. They tore it down and built her a house. So my mother had a house. She wasn't satisfied until I had a house. I gained a house in the East End area, which I am extremely proud of. Through what was called a government project called the Dollar Lines. And that was how I acquired my house.
But it didn't cost just $1.
Well, they say they did. It was also, it was a government project, so I am still convinced that house never got a CO. I am convinced of the things that I had to do, and I absolutely hated the house. I hated that house. Houses then came with, it was a house. It had no gutters. It had no driveway. No one had prepared the land. It took me about 25 years to glean my backyard as to where my children could go out and play. It had been a garbage dump. No one said, oh, we're going to make this level. We're going to do this. No, they built a house and just set it there. But the Lord said, you can have this house. But the interesting thing about that house, even though I wasn't in love with the house, it sits on 1/3 of an acre of land in downtown Asheville. So you can't tell me there is not God.
Great. Well, turning to a different thread here, you grow up and you become a young woman, adult, with a career, but talk a little bit about how that career world shaped up. This is before you are thinking of the possibility of becoming a deacon. But even before then, what you were doing, what was that about? And perhaps how did that form you?
What formed me? Living through segregation, going through that period of time. I was also in the 7th grade is when they integrated schools. I attended David Miller. I found out later that one of our bishops was there at the same time. We didn't know each other, but that was interesting that now he was my bishop. Then I attended Allen High School. And that's before you get to the tunnel, well, it's kind of hard to see now that they built a hotel, but there was some white buildings on the side, and I was a day student. It was an all-girls school, and I thought it was something. I was so proud to have been there, and then I found out much later in my life that most of those girls were there because it was there or go to jail. I thought I was somewhere. And it was very interesting. It was church-led. So I was there. I then left. I graduated high school in Cleveland, Ohio. Remember I told you about that Latin? And I attended a high school that was the United Nations. I had never lived in the slums other than Valley Street. So that had a lot to do with it. I was in this school that was so large, there was a graduating class in January and a graduating class in June. That was a lot of kids, and they were from everywhere. And no, I don't know anything about the ghetto of Cleveland. I did not live in it. I lived in a suburb, and I think that has a lot to do with it. It was people in my life that helped form my life. That I said that Joan Marshall, who was your first female deacon, and she had a lot to do with molding me. But life itself, just living every day and getting through it, will mold a person. I've been exceptionally fortunate to have people in my life. I attended airline school because, trade schools back in the day was that if you didn't have money to go to school, you went to a trade school. I went to a trade school for airline jobs out in Missouri. And I came back, and of course I had some friends. And many of the girls, instead of getting jobs in the airline industry, got jobs with the Department of the Navy, the Department of the Army, as typists. My nails won't let me type. But I did get a job with the Air Traffic Controllers, PATCO, the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization. You do remember those guys. Remember Reagan fired them all?
Yep.
Well, I started out as the receptionist there, and when I left, I was the director of membership. Try that and move back to North Carolina and say that's what you did. So then I had to change up all my professions. I sold insurance for a while. I could not do that for the simple reason you were not allowed to sell African Americans policies like $350,000, $500,000. You only had to sell them the little penny things. Couldn't do it. Worked for Bill Stanley's at Bill Stanley's Barbecue for a long, long time. I can clog if you needed to know. I can do that. Met a lot of people there. We know that Bill went on to be the chairman of the county commissioners. He was always a good resource when I needed a reference. I've always had good people in my life. So again, it goes back to the church. Again, it goes back to my faith. They've always been there. So it wasn't that I grew up on my own. There were always people there to guide me.
Now, you were saying to me at one point when we were talking beforehand that you had a job as a mediator. And explain what a mediator is just generally, and then talk to us about sort of what you did and how it contributed to your formation.
Well, we're going to have to come back to church again. Joan Marshall, the deacon, I believe, and I don't know for sure, and somebody will have to correct me on this, there was a task force that was formed. I'm not sure if it was formed here, but she was part of a task force that was looking at the court system at the time. Because there were so many little things in court that was really tying it up. Disputes about, oh, that's my property and there are flowers growing on it. Or things like harassing phone calls. Or just those little petty things that were tying up court. So, and it was also during that time where we were looking at, restorative justice. And that was a big thing for members here at All Souls. So the Mediation Center was formed, and I'll get to what it means to be a mediator. Joan said to the director, I know someone that is a natural, but she doesn't know that she's a natural. And she called me up and said, go for this interview. At the time, I was running around with the North Carolina National Guard, 211 MP company, of which I was a member. I was not looking for a job, but I went. The executive director at that time was Barbara Davis. She has since passed on to heaven. I fell in love with her. It was like instant. It was like we had this conversation and we had so much in common and da-da-da. And she said, come to work for me. And I went, what? But I did. So Barbara and I were in the courthouse annex, which isn't there anymore, and we were mediators. At that time, the mediator is a third party. When you have conflicting individuals that agree to sit down and try to work it out, try to talk it out, you're just this individual that's guiding. You're facilitating a session. Honestly, the only thing I knew about mediators was the Cold War, where white men were mediators, and that's who you saw on TV. So for someone to say, you're natural, you're a mediator, I didn't believe it. So I go to work for Barbara as a mediator, and it took me a year and a half to be properly trained by the American Bar Association. I was mediating the whole time. So when my training came along, I thought, oh, that's nifty. I became a trainer at that point. So it was just that. Again, Joan, church, God, I cannot say, and I'm sure one of your questions will be, how did you become a deacon? How is it that I couldn't? All of this was always in front of me. And then when it came time when people kept saying, why aren't you a deacon? Why aren't you a deacon? And I thought, why are you messing with me? I'm okay. But it just kept getting to be, why aren't you a deacon? And I'm a deacon today, not because God spoke to me. He does. But I didn't see any burning bushes. I looked at my faith one day. I looked at my church. There was no one that looked like me in leadership. Every priest, with the exception, maybe 2 priests at St. Matthias at the time, had been men of color. They had always been white males. And I was dealing with, at that time, working with the Mediation Center and having developed a program called Life Skills. And it was called Life Skills for adjudicated youth and their parents. I believe it was 8 weeks or 12 weeks, but you had to spend time with me. That wasn't the easiest thing for most people. But my mediating skills just increased. The program was all mine, which then led to my being in the prisons, working with men in the prisons with a program, a fatherhood program, and I was the assistant with a male. And it just kept growing.
What was this fatherhood program?
That's a fatherhood program, and we give shout outs. My shout out goes to Robert Simmons, who took me to many places. Mr. Simmons had a program, and he talked to me one day, and he says, I'm having some difficulty with these guys, because every time I talk to the guys, they say, if she hadn't done this, or she did this. He said, I really need a female voice. So I became that female voice at Craigie and the one on the hill, I forget what it's called, Buncombe Correctional Facility. Also, we had a program to where we could go in. Because you have to remember, even though these men were incarcerated, they were fathers. The type of father that would call their kids on the weekend or when they could because they were still man of the house. Not really. Not really. Because you're talking to that kid on the phone and the kid's like, yeah. So, and I had to remind them of the difficulty that your children were having, because with my life skills program, I was also stationed at the high school. I had, I think, 3 or 4 offices. I was at the middle school, the alternative school, and the high school for many years. And after 21 years of working with the mediation center, when I left there, I went on with Asheville City Schools for 10 years doing a mediation program in the school. But with the fathers, it got to the point where I needed for them to realize who they were and what their children were going through. See, your children are at school saying, yeah, I'll go to jail. It ain't nothing but 3 meals and a cop. I can do that. My daddy's in jail, my grandfather's in jail, my uncle, my brother. I need for you guys in jail to stop this nonsense. I need for you to be truthful. This is not where you want your children. But I've also had the opportunity of following a child from kindergarten to prison. That has happened. I had a program also at the Juvenile Evaluation Center called Goodbye Cinderella. And it was for the girls that were incarcerated. Now don't get me wrong, I don't think that Cinderella was this little meek person. I think she was very, very strong. Don't believe that fairy tale stuff. So it was called Goodbye Cinderella. And that kept me out there. So when I say that I saw them from kindergarten to prison, I remember being at the Juvenile Evaluation Center one day and saw this young man's head and instantly knew who he was. And I walked up to him and I said, don't I know you? And he said, Miss McDowell, what are you doing here? I got skills. And he laughed and I said, what are you doing here? He said, I knew I would be here. So my whole thing with being a mediator and being in the community and working with my children was to have dialogue. You know, when kids fight because somebody said your mama, that wasn't about your mama. That was about them. And I was that individual that said, so let me see if I understand this correctly. Someone said something about your mother who they don't know, and you react. So your mother now gets a phone call from school. She's got to take off work, lose money, get in a car if she has one, or get in a cab and come across town to get you. And you're going to be home a couple of days. So the fact that you were talking about your mother, this must be how it went. Your mother comes and picks you up, and you get in the car, and she says, oh, you are fighting for my honor? Oh, my goodness. What do you want to eat? We're going to stop at the store. I'm going to cook your favorite meal. Where do you want to go shopping? I'm going to buy you anything that you want. And the kid is looking at me like, what? Your mother didn't say that? And they're like, no. I said, well, I need to talk to her because she doesn't appreciate what you did on her behalf. And then they would see this wasn't about my mother. This was about me. So then we could get in the position of what do we do when people say things like that? What do you respond? How do you respond when people say things like that? And we got this little thing. Brush your shoulder off and keep on stepping. If you have long hair, flip that hair back and go on down the hall. They don't know you. So for 10 years I did that. And then I retired from the school system. I'm quite looking forward to my 3rd retirement, by the way, which is coming up in October. Father doesn't believe that I'm going to retire from the church in October. But in October I will be 72. And 72, the church says, you're of retirement age. That doesn't mean I'm going away. I'm just going to retire.
Well, I don't believe that any more than here I am at 80 still. So, Deacon Glenda, be careful. But you know, I'm listening to all of this, I'm realizing that at every stage you're gathering these wonderful skills of knowing people, appreciating what their lives are really like. And, you know, this is all leading you. All of these pieces of work you've done have been leading you. They're not the thing you were going to be. That was yet to be discovered. And you sort of let the cat out of the bag by saying something about deacon, whatever that is. But now, how did that start to, take shape as a real possibility for you? And who was saying that to you? And what did you think being a deacon was? And where did you see any models for you being a deacon?
Well, there were no models that looked like me, for one thing. And I think that was my inspiration more than anything, because at the time, there were 5 young ladies that I was working with that was attending St. Matthias. And these were young ladies that, you boost them up and you keep them going, but all the time I'm saying, you can be anything that you want to do. Anything you want to do. But again, I became a deacon out of leadership. If children don't see themselves in other people, what can they do? And one of the things that I absolutely love about being a deacon here at the cathedral is standing right here when little brown girls come down this aisle and look up. I'm probably about the size of them anyway, but all of a sudden I'm sure I look a lot taller. But seeing them see themselves in someone else is important. But when you say, who are my sheroes or who are my heroes, usually they look like you. They have something in common. But our church was remiss. Where were the people that looked like the people in the pews in leadership? So again, it was about leadership. But it was also something that, I don't know, I was having a conversation with my cousin one day, and I said to her, we were having this conversation, and in the African American community, we have a lot of preachers, we have a lot of elders, we have a lot of deacons, and I said, we were having a conversation, and she said, do you know who is preaching now? And I was like, no way, girl, don't ever let that happen to me. Don't you ever let, it just seemed like that was the way it was going. But at the same time, I would be doing a presentation at the Y. It was also during the time that all the kids were messing with each other, calling each other faggots, which was a bundle of sticks. And we had to make that known. And I was speaking to some children, and you can see I speak with a cadence of sorts. And I was speaking, and I heard the kids say, whose mama is that over there preaching? And they went, oh, that's Peter's mama. She always preaches. So it was kind of following me. I knew nothing about being a deacon. We didn't have a deacon necessarily until I think Jim Abbott got to, he will be following me, when Father Abbott got to St. Matthias, we started having deacons, female white deacons. Still didn't know what it was, and I think at one point Jim said, you need to think about being a deacon. And I wasn't real sure. See, I didn't know that as a deacon, you didn't have to preach. They told me I had to preach. I have now met some deacons that have never, ever preached. I'm like, what? I thought that was part of the game. And now it's like when the fathers found out that I could preach, they kept insisting that I do preach. And the one thing that I would like to be known as a deacon that can preach, not as a deacon that preaches. And now it's kind of that she can preach. When I met Bishop Curry, I was with a good friend, and we were giddy schoolgirls meeting Bishop Curry, literally. We were just giggling and walked up, and we met him and we shook our hand, and she said, and she can preach. And he looked at me and said, I bet she can. It was like God just said, you aren't Lord at that point. So when I think about it, when I even don't want to preach, I remember I've got Bishop Curry's blessings. I can do this. So again, I wasn't running from it, but it did seem to be chasing me.
I think it was chasing you for years, only you didn't know it was. Because it kept under the radar there.
They kept under that. This is what happened in the African American community. People became preachers, and I was like, God ain't talking to that many people. But, and again, I'm not saying that God and I fight. Let me say that. We fight. You know, do I hear voices? Sometimes. Don't tell anybody. But sometimes. And we disagree. Because, see, I don't understand. We fight. We fight all the time. Isn't 100 years enough, God? Why am I still going through this? You promised me the days would be better. So when my days are not better, we have a conversation. But it's an ongoing conversation. And even though I might be upset with God today, I'm going to be okay tomorrow. And it's a process.
You know, people might not understand exactly what a deacon is. You described your preaching, which is a piece of being a deacon, but not necessarily a piece of being a deacon. But what is the deacon's gift? What do
I'm only speaking for me
That's
and my
all.
understanding of
That's
being
right.
a deacon. Let's clear some things up. I am a vocational deacon. I am not going to be a priest. Right? This is as far as I'm going. I am a vocational deacon here at All Souls. I am not a part of staff. I am a servant. I serve Father. I serve at the discretion of the bishop. I am not a paid employee. So a deacon, what I loved about it, when I heard about it, and this is how my child part translated that. The deacon is the outlaw of the church. The deacon goes out into the community, sees what's happening, takes it all in, and comes back and presents it to the church and says, did you know this was happening? What are we going to do about it? And I love that. I absolutely love that. It's like the heartbeat of the community. You can go out in and come back, and you wonder, how do new ministries start? Hopefully the deacon brought it back to the church, and you say there's a need. How do we fill it?
And that's so different. I mean, priests, by their temperament, like fences around them. I mean, there's the church, there's all the activities of the church. A deacon is somebody who just jumps right over the fence and goes out as far into the world out there as possible and brings back this news from, hey, that foreign country, to the priest, and says to the congregation, do you know what's going on?
Yeah, you're the eyes and the ears for the priest that's busy.
Yep.
The priest has a flock, and he's tending his flock. The deacon is living. You know, the deacon is out there every day. And the deacon sees things that moves them, shakes them, shapes them. And a lot of times, the work that you are doing, you're already a deacon. Just by the work that you're doing and communicating with people. Well, let me say this when I say communicating. Communication is so important. One of the reasons that I called my program Life Skills, because I felt that communication was one of the best life skills one could have. So the art of communicating is that of the deacon. And to bring it back and to present it in a form that the church can hear. Because everything that you bring back to the church, it doesn't get excited about. But when we live in a community now that has, and my numbers might be off, at least 100 plus nonprofits. That's a lot of nonprofits. But that grew out of a need. The need of the community. So who were the individuals that said this needs to happen? Were they deacons? They were deacons because all of you are deacons. Nobody has to tap you on the head, send you to school or anything. Everyone that sits in this pew is a deacon because you are also the ones that come back and say, you know, we need to do something about this. I want to have something that does this. I want to dedicate this, or I want to donate to this. So we're all deacons. It's just so that some of us are recognized more, get to wear the sash, get to wear the collar. You know, as my Baptist friends think that we're schizophrenic, because how can you be the Reverend Deacon, Glenda? You gotta be one or the other. So I explain it to them this way. When I am at All Souls, I am the deacon. When you invite me to your church, I am the reverend, and I am expecting my check at the end of my service. That's the difference.
Now, Deacon Glenda, I'm always hearing you're going off and doing some lectures or taking a class in a church or doing this or that. What are the variety of ways in which you exercise your diaconate these days? Or any days?
Okay, when I'm not here, a lot of people think that I'm on vacation. No, when I'm not here, I'm probably at another church. I spend time at St. Matthias. I spend time at Trinity. I've been out at Holy Spirit. I get around. Mainly because they don't have enough color in their church, and I tend to add a little, to be quite honest. But when I'm not here, recently I was at Mars Hill College. And it was interesting because I didn't know how they knew about me. You get this call and they want you to come out and speak, and you go, what? Who? And I start calling my friends that had connections, and they didn't know what I was talking about. And she had watched our Zoom. So I get invited sometimes because people say, I like your energy. Well, when you preached, and I didn't hear that, and I never heard that. But I will develop programs. I've been the chaplain at Camp Henry. I also attended Camp Henry when I was 8 or 9. If anybody has those old records, I would like to know the first time St. Matthias' kids started coming to Camp Henry. But I attended Camp Henry when it was in Black Mountain, you know, with the heated pool. A heated indoor pool in 1959? Come on, guys. You know, a bowling alley in a mansion. It was the things that you were exposed to. And then later, having attended that, and then being the chaplain at Camp Henry, I do what is asked of me. And if there's something that people want, and it's something that has to be developed, then you do that. Right now, I'm very active in Education for Ministry, EFM. And that's a program that everybody should be in at some point. So you meet people. Once you meet people and they say, oh, what did you do? And they might be even interested in my life as a mediator, or how is it that you organize something? So I'm open. If you need something and I can do it, I'll be there.
Well, you said the unforgivable word just a little while ago about retirement.
It's a real word.
Oh, is it? It's not in any dictionary I know. We clergy, you know, retire in a sense, but God isn't done with you. So what sort of things are you thinking about, you know, in the year time to come? What's still percolating in you? What's unfinished? What's that growing edge, Deacon Glenda, that's out there that you are not going to be able to escape?
Well, I'm a mother.
Yes.
I have 2 children. I have 5 grandchildren and 1 great-granddaughter. I see me being instrumental in the great-granddaughter's life. You know, we do things now where she comes in the morning and I say good morning. I say hola. I also say en français. There are things that she's my little experiment, and I'm hoping to have more time with her. There are other things that I do. I'm an artist. I have a lot of little things, piddling things that I do. I'll change the faucet of the sink in a heartbeat, and I just want to do those things.
Sort of regain a life.
Oh yeah, I want to get to a point in my life where I really don't have to be anywhere. Nobody's expecting me. I don't have to be on time. I just need a period in my life where I've done good. My work has been done and I need to rest. And I just want to rest before God calls me home. So I am looking forward to retire. That doesn't mean I'm going to go away, as I say here often. My next project is to create a triangle, if I must be honest, is to create a triangle with the cathedral being at the top. Because this is the cathedral. This campus needs to be known. It needs to be a campus. This should be a place of learning. This should be a place where people come in. And I want to connect cathedral to Trinity to St. Matthias. And the reason is that St. Matthias came out of Trinity, to know the history. And St. Matthias is predominantly, it said, is to be an African-American church. Nobody's recruiting. That church is dying with African-Americans. Nobody's recruiting. But it's on the National Register, and we will always say it was predominantly African-American, but there won't be any soon. That can't happen. Why would we let that happen? So tying in All Souls. I remember coming to All Souls, there were 3 priests here. I remember going to Trinity, and they had 2 or 3. And St. Matthias, their members were keeping that church together, holding that church. And we say we're one church under God. Really? So I would like to tie those in, that we know that Kyle has a great choir. We know the acoustics at St. Matthias is fabulous. Why isn't that this church can host it, but it's held somewhere else? That's real estate that is sitting there. Why are we not using all of our real estate? So if I'm going to get in trouble, that's probably the trouble I'm going to get in after I retire.
I'd call that good trouble, though, Deacon Glenda.
Now, some people just say Glenda's meddling. There's a difference. Glenda's meddling. She's at the cathedral. Let her stay at the cathedral. But I have friends at Trinity. I'm at Trinity quite a bit. I have friends at St. Matthias. I want that church to be there. That beacon on the hill, I also worry about it sometimes. And I want to make sure it's there. So if anything, I would probably get active in that. And I can say this out loud, and the bishop's listening. He knows we've had this conversation.
I'm beginning to think I'm hogging the conversation with you when there are people out there that I've promised there would be time for them to ask questions.
They don't have any questions. Okay.
So, I'll just see what the kind of questions they have. And
Sure.
David has volunteered to be the torch there and to pass it to you so that you can ask questions, speak into the microphone so that we can hear up here, and the people who are listening on various clouds and celestial backgrounds can listen to and hear the question. So, David, walk around and see if any hands come up.
Glenda, we love you so much. And I wonder how it feels to be almost the only Black person in this whole white,
Let me see if I heard the question. How does it feel?
to be almost the only Black person in a white place like this. I try to imagine myself, in a completely.
When Father Todd asked me to come, that was my biggest concern. oh my God, I do not feel in there. And Father Todd kept saying, we need you. It turned out that I needed you as much, I feel, as he felt you guys needed me. The growth here has been amazing. It's not often that I think about being the only brown person here, because I'm not. There are others here, so it's not like I'm totally isolated. I think I thought about it recently when the world changed. And I'm very much aware that if the church became a target, I would be a bigger target. But normally, it's not something that I think about. Father Todd was so sincere in my coming here. And I remember when I was going through the diaconate, I thought no church would want me. And I remember them saying, you couldn't go back to your church for a period of time. And when Father Todd asked me to come here, it was like, oh my God. I knew Father Todd prior to my coming because of being a mediator and being in the community, and he was active in the community. I knew people here. Diane Russell, I knew her before getting here. The lady, her name just went out of my head, that was with Asheville Citizen Times. She did 3 large articles on me. This woman did an article that was a 5x7 color on Asheville Citizen's Times about black women that never married, and I was 40. I knew people here that I trusted, that I had worked with. So it wasn't that foreign to me, and I was going to make you guys prove, okay, that please don't ever tell me you're colorblind. That don't wash with me. But that you recognize and that you want it and you welcome me. And sometimes you just have to push the envelope. You have to put yourself in places to make change. So here I am, and it's been 10 years now.
Other questions?
You can ask me what colors I like. I take those simple questions also.
Favorite colors?
Thank you, David.
It depends on what style that shoe is, and if that shoe is formed right, I'll take it in any color. And that was the other, not to cut you off, that was the interesting thing. When I came, David Nard was your deacon. And I came in my stilettos, if you remember. And the women were so busy watching me come up these steps here in those stilettos. And someone said, David is not going to let you wear those stilettos. He believes in no Jesus sandals and shoes. And I'm looking around, and everybody's got on Jesus sandals. He must not be paying attention. I knew my stilettos were okay.
Any further questions?
Nancy Marlowe, that was the reporter.
Ah.
We lost Nancy a couple of years ago. Nancy Marlowe did several large articles on me. So again, when I came here, I was no stranger to a lot of people.
What changes have you seen since you came here in the awareness of the racial divide and the coming together? How has that seemed to you, and how do you... Pardon?
We're still divided. We're divided in the city. You know that even though there are many communities, including my direct community, that is being gentrified, the city constantly changes. But if I can just keep it within the sphere of All Souls here, what was coming out of the pulpit was amazing. We weren't running away from the issues of the day. When Millie would call names of individuals that had been shot or killed, when Naomi would preach, you got the feel that it was coming from the pulpit. We were not running away from it. And that wasn't easy. It wasn't easy to get us to that. I remember, and Father Todd, if you're listening, you and I would have conversations, and I would say, but we are the cathedral. There's certain expectations I had with that name. That name itself sets us up. It puts us up there. I remember when I first got here, I didn't know if you guys were welcoming or not because there was no sign outside that said what time your services were held. I found that very upsetting, and I know that we're in a place where you can't have, the signs have to look a lot, they can't be huge, and they can't, but there was nothing out there that said what time your service was. And I mentioned that. Then I saw a sign. I remember one of the servers said to me, one of the principal servers said, why is it that my censors aren't colored? I don't know. And they said, we've always asked for them. And I asked Father Todd, why is it? And the next thing I know, they had colored censors. I didn't do that, but now we look good up here on the altar. But yes, I've seen some changes, but we made big strides, 60s, 70s, 80s, and then something happened, and it feels like we've been jerked back. When I preach, I constantly remind us that we are a praying church, and if your prayers are sincere, and your prayers are ongoing, and we're praying for peace, and we're being peaceful, and we're praying will draw others in. You have to be visible in the city. They have to know you're welcome. And for all souls, you're in an awkward position. For people of color that don't shop in Biltmore Village or don't feel they can be in Biltmore Village, do you think they're going to walk in this church? Not without an invitation. So what are we doing to get people that are different? But when you look out in the pews, I think we're represented quite well. Maybe 4 or 5 African Americans or people of color, but what are the other nationalities that are there? That's important also.
Deacon Glenda,
Yes.
I want to thank you for this hour that you've given us.
Has it been an hour already?
Yes, it has, just about. And on behalf of everyone who's here and everyone who's listening, thank you for sharing yourself, your deep, deep wisdom, and your commitment. And as a way,
Can I
yes,
say that I hope this isn't the last time? People, you can ask me anything. You can have a conversation with me about anything. You can hang out with me. I am one of those individuals, until we break bread, I don't know that we have really communicated. Something happens with breaking bread. So don't let this be the last time that you guys choose to have a conversation with me. I'm here.
thank you. Don't go anywhere. So that you can remember us for the next week and what you did here.
Oh, these are beautiful.
And they've, yeah, and there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deacon
I was going to
Glenda.
ask him for this plant, but I guess I won't.
That's the fixture for the whole set of talks.
Can I share the story I told you?
Please do.
Okay. Orchids. When I was growing up as a girl, there were 2 things, or a couple of things that said you were rich. One was a library in your house that said you were rich. Books, because books are expensive. There are books all over my house. The other thing were cut flowers. But what I would hear all the time, especially with white males that were quite prominent, when they would ask them about their hobbies, they were always growing orchids. And that to me was so far away from me. Oh, I can't afford them. It must be something special. Last year, I spent a week in Florida, And I was visiting this woman, and she had orchids, and I asked about them, and I said, "Oh, they must be so special." And she said, "There's nothing special about them." And I told her the story, and she said, "Oh, get you an orchid a couple of days a week, just throw some ice cubes in on it and leave it alone." And I thought, really? Is nothing more special than that? So I learned a lot. So when I came in and I saw this orchid, and I explained how beautiful it was, but I bought myself one this year for Valentine's Day. And I just throw a couple of ice cubes in it every other day. But that was one of those things that, set us apart. It's little things that set us apart that become big things. And I really thought I couldn't handle this because it was all the other, and it was males. I never saw women with it. It was males that had them in their garages and everywhere, and they would come home and they would take care of their orchids. And now to find out it wasn't that special.
Well, thank you again, Deacon Glenda, and thanks to Hope and Bonnie for being back there, making sure that this gets broadcast in various ways, and to those who aren't here but are listening. So thank you both, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
And see you all next week when Laura Miller comes to talk about Afghan resettlement in the Asheville area. You did it, girl. I never had a moment's doubt. Well, you're welcome.